Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fandom. I am Michael. Today I'm going to go over a kind of a philosophical argument against abortion. So, just for what I've seen, what I've experienced engaging in people who support abortion, all of their arguments seem to be more on the philosophical or emotional side of things, not really anything like scientific, and they absolutely don't want to hear a religious argument. So, I thought we'd go over the SLED argument because it's more of a philosophical. I think that it's a pretty good argument that really kind of hits each point someone who's pro-abortion might make in their argumentation for abortion. If I sound a little bit under the weather, I am. I have COVID. I just tested positive for COVID yesterday and feel like I have kind of like a bad cold or something like that. So bear with me on that. Hopefully it won't be a very long video. And at the end, I think I will go over the cases of rape or incest as it relates to the argument for or against abortion. All right, so abortion, been in the news lately, very popular, lots of arguments online about it. And yeah, it's, I think, and most Christians think, it's probably the worst almost like a holocaust of children basically in America, and it's one of the big issues that plague not only America but also the church. So let's go ahead and knock out the SLED argument. SLED. All right, so the SLED argument's an acronym. You have your S for size, L for level of development, E is for environment, and D is for degree of development. So let's start with S. One of the pro-choice movements, arguments is the size of the child. So personally, I believe that life does start at conception and that is a human life, and scientifically, if cells can reproduce, something can grow, it is alive. So is it a baby? Is it human? Is it alien? What? Well, it has a human mother, a human father, so it is a human life. So therefore, we are talking about human lives at all these stages of development within the womb. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. Now, the size of development, one of the arguments is going to be you can abort up to a certain size. A lot of times you'll hear that as it relates to a trimester. So like, let's say first trimester, you can abort, and because it's not as large or anything like that, it's still a small creature or whatever within the womb. Well, if you look at the size argument that the pro-choice movement makes, you're basically placing a value of life based on the size of the person. So just to kind of demonstrate, I'm 5'8", so I would be considered short or short average in stature. So my life, I would not have as much, my life would not have as much value as someone who is 6 foot or 6'5". Most of you watching this would not have, your life would not have as much value as Shaquille O'Neal, who is like 7 foot tall or larger. So if you are consistent with that argument, if a pro-choicer is going to be consistent with their argumentation, making the argument that the life within the womb is not as much of a human or not as valuable due to the size, well, they would have to also admit that their life is not as valuable as Shaquille O'Neal's, because they're most likely going to be a smaller person than him. My wife would probably reject this argument because she is 5'6", and I would have to say my life has more value because I am bigger than she is. And that just doesn't work in humans. It should not be applied to the preborn as well. Well, level of development kind of plays off of that size thing as well. So your level of development is, just as it says, how developed is the child. So a pro-choicer will say that because this baby doesn't have certain characteristics that are consistent with the human life or a human body, yet then their life's not as valuable, and it's okay to murder that child in the womb. Well, we also have people who are born and they're not as developed as other people. One case in point with this would be well, let's just back up for just a second. One of the things you can do to kind of test your child's development within the womb would be you could have these tests done. So they can stick a needle, I think, into the they can stick a needle in there, draw out some fluids or whatever, and they can test for any type of conditions that the child might have. Let's say Down syndrome. That's probably the most popular one, and I believe the stat is like 90% of children who test positive for Down syndrome within the womb are aborted, which is kind of Hitler-esque, if you ask me. I don't think that is very good at all. I mean, we saw in the 40s, and people get upset that Hitler decided he was going to terminate living people who had disabilities. And that's essentially what we're doing in America, but within the womb. The level of development can range in degree. You might have a child who has not developed certain characteristics, maybe the heart's not beating yet, maybe you're still within like that 3-week mark and the heart's not beating yet, but it's going to beat. It's heading in that direction. Well, because it's not developed to that point, you can kill it. Well, there are people who are born without an arm or without a leg. Are they any less valuable than someone who has all of their limbs? We would say no. Most people would say no. But if you're going to apply the pro-choice argumentation that the human fetus is not as human or not as valuable to the point in which you can terminate that life because of their lack of development, you would have to be consistent and apply it to living people as well. And in fact, you have philosophers and some people around the world who do and are arguing for things like infanticide and terminating the elderly and the disabled. So it's not a good world we want to live in, and I think that's a very immoral argument to support the termination of a life just because a child is not as developed or may not be as developed as the average human life doesn't make their life any less valuable. They're still just as valuable as anyone else. E. This is one that probably gets used probably the most really right now because you think my body, my choice. E is environment. The environment in which the life is found within the mother's womb. My life, my choice. My body, my choice. That's it. My body, my choice. It's my body. Therefore, I can decide what I want to do within the environment of my body. Well, so that is going to be used in order to rationalize or rationalize the termination of a life because of the environment in which that life is found. One of the other arguments of pro-choice I've heard, it's an emotional argument, but I've heard lots of people make is the baby could be born into severe poverty. Well, in America, we don't really have as severe poverty as other parts of the world. I'm not saying we don't have it. I think it's all kind of based on the country in which you live and what we consider poverty. But the baby could be born into severe poverty or into a home or an environment in which it's not loved. So we should just kill the baby. Well, it might grow up in poverty, but at least it's still getting a chance to grow up. But the environment here is going to be based on being located in the womb within the mother. So just because the baby is located in the mother for 9 to 10 months isn't an excuse to terminate the baby, because we could apply that same logic to people who are impoverished. Think about Africa. Think about the diseases, the poverty, the starvation that children go through in Africa in that environment, and we don't hear the pro-choice movement arguing to terminate those lives because of their environment. So if you're not going to argue in that situation, why would you apply it in this other situation? The environment in which a life is found is no reason to terminate the life. Okay. And D, this is going to be development, degree of development. D is degree of dependence. And this is, again, one of the bigger arguments for the pro-choice camp. They like to use environment, degree of dependence. They don't use size as much, but it gets used. So degree of dependence is going to be the degree in which a life depends on another life to survive. A baby within the womb is 100% dependent on that mother for life at that point. So therefore, the pro-choice movement is going to argue that because that baby is dependent on the mother, its life is either not as valuable, and the mother can decide to quit giving the allowing that baby to depend on her for life, essentially. Now, we have people who are sick. We have people who may have had accidents and they can no longer care for themselves. We have the elderly in nursing homes. They all have a degree of dependence. So if you're telling me that because a baby has to depend on a mother or someone else to live, therefore it is not as human, it is not as valuable, and therefore we can then take its life, why is that argument not being made by most pro-choicers when it comes to the elderly, the disabled, those camps? Some philosophers around the world are making those cases. I think they're very evil cases, and I think that even most pro-choice activists would agree that we don't terminate people because they may have had an accident and depend on someone else for care, or because they've aged into a stage in life in which they have to rely on others to live. You can even make the case of like medication. So like in my case, I take a blood thinner right now because I had open heart surgery back in March. And the blood thinner is supposed to help. It's not keeping me alive, but I'm a little bit dependent on it in case there were a problem, in case there was a problem that arose, within the months after my heart surgery. So because I'm dependent on a drug, should I be terminated? Am I any less valuable than someone who is not dependent on a medication? I also take blood pressure medication. That makes me dependent for my health and my life on someone else who's creating the drug, giving me the drug, and the drug to keep my body functioning the way it should. Does that make my life any less valuable than someone else? I'm sure some of you say, yeah, it does. But you might not like me. But most people are not going to apply that across the board. You have to ask yourself, when, let's say, your parents become old and they rely on you or nurses or medical intervention for their health and their life, are they any less valuable than someone's parents who are not at that stage of life yet? I don't think that you would answer yes, they're less valuable, and that gives us the right to go ahead and just terminate them. Well, it should not. If that's not going to apply to other human life, why are we applying it to life within the womb? We've already established that the fetus is created by humans. It is alive, therefore it is a human life. Not that complicated. I think that it's inconsistent and immoral to place these arguments on based on their size, their level of dependency, their environment, and go based on these criteria to decide whether or not that life is worth living or worth terminating, when we're not applying it to any other groups of human life. All right, last but not least, because inevitably there will be, inevitably, I didn't say that, I don't think very correctly, a little bit of a fever, sorry. So I'm sure somebody might see this and they're going to say, so wait, would you force a woman to carry a rapist baby? Or, they like to say, what about the child who is raped or whatever, God forbid, and they become pregnant? Would you really force that victim to carry that baby? And I think a lot of the church, a lot of pro-life people are going to say, well, no. In the case of that, it's okay to kill that life. Me, on the other hand, I'm going to be consistent. I used to think that. I'm not going to lie. I used to think, yeah, in the case of rape, incest, stuff like that, it's okay to terminate. But if I'm going to be consistent in my argumentation, I have to also view that life of that human life just as valuable as I would a human life that came about by non-evil circumstances. Like I said, it's living two human parents, it's a human life, and it doesn't matter who the father is or the situation in which that human life was created. It's still a human life, and it's the most innocent form of human life that we can find. It has done nothing to warrant basically a capital punishment at this point, being in the womb. So no, I don't think that those cases make the exception to make it okay to terminate the baby. I think that in that case, you would be punishing the most innocent form of human life, unborn baby, for the actions of, let's say, the father, the biological father. And we would not apply that sort of justice or punishment to living people. I don't think we should a unborn person as well. And in fact, if you're going to make that argument, it's very easy for someone who's pro-choice to then apply that to, well, maybe the mother made a bad choice that night at the bar that got her pregnant. So it's the same thing. You're punishing the child for the reason the parents brought it into existence, and I don't support that. So if you're going to be consistently pro-life, you can't make exceptions for terminating babies based on who their parents are or how they came into being. That would be an inconsistency, and I think that the pro-choice camp can run all over that inconsistency and start tearing down the rest of your arguments. So there's my personal favorite argument against abortion, the SLED argument, SLED. Remember, size, level of development, environment, and dependency, degree of dependency. Those, I think, really encapsulate the entire I think really if you can learn that argument, you really have a good response for any argument that could come at you from the pro-choice camp, any logical argument anyway, because I think a lot of the emotional stuff, is low-hanging fruit. But if someone were to make, their consistent, philosophical arguments or what they consider logical, I think that SLED can pretty much knock down those arguments pretty well. And it doesn't have the religious overtones or whatever that is going to, get shut out by a pro-choicer who might be, let's say, an atheist. So I like it. I think it's a good philosophical argument, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Very common sense approach to being pro-life. All right, guys, I do appreciate you checking out the video. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, hit the like button. Do subscribe, ring the bell, drop in the comments any arguments that you know of that are maybe different and your favorites for the pro-choice camp, or not pro-choice, pro-life camp. I'm sorry. COVID brain. Also, I think I'm going to do an apologetic video for more geared toward Christians. This one is more geared toward engaging someone who's not a believer in this, abortion arena. I think I want to do one that is geared toward the church, because we have a lot of pro-choice people within the church, and there were a lot of pro-choice people through, the 50s, 60s, 70s, big name religious leaders that you guys would have heard of, who did actually end up going back and changing their stance on abortion. So if you wanted a video that's more geared toward the church with more religious argumentation, like straight from the Bible, I can make that as well. All right, guys. Again, thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Like, comment, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and we're done.